She called me the help, not behind my back. Not in a whisper she thought I couldn't hear. She said it right there at my own Thanksgiving table, to people she'd invited into my house without asking me, with a smile on her face like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Oh, don't worry about him," my daughter-in-law said, waving her hand toward me like I was a piece of furniture she was pointing out. "He just helps around the house." The room laughed. Her friends laughed. My son, looked down at his plate, and my 9-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Wait, no, her name is not in that file. Let me get this right. My granddaughter looked up at me from across the table with these big brown eyes and asked, in the quietest voice, "Grandpa, are you the help?" That was the moment. Not the moment I snapped. I'm 67 years old. I don't snap anymore. That was the moment I finally, completely without any doubt left in my mind, knew exactly what I was going to do. Let me go back a little. You need to understand the full picture, because when I tell you what happened next, I don't want you thinking I'm some angry old man who overreacted. I want you to understand what I put up with, and why I put up with it for as long as I did. My name is Gordon. I'm 67. I spent 31 years as a high school history teacher. My wife, Maureen, passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, 2 years from diagnosis to the end. After she died, it was just me in this house, a 4-bedroom colonial in central Ohio that Maureen and I bought in 1989 when my son Evan was 2 years old. We painted every room together. We put in the garden out back. We refinished the hardwood floors ourselves over one long summer. Maureen in an old college t-shirt, both of us laughing at how bad we were at it. This house is not just a building. You understand that, right? Every scratch in the kitchen door frame where we measured Evan's height every birthday, the window in the upstairs hallway that sticks because we never got around to fixing it. This house is 30-something years of a life. Evan is 35 now. Good kid, mostly. Soft in the way that some men are soft. Not unkind, just conflict-averse in a way that ends up causing more conflict in the long run because things never get addressed. He met his wife, Gretchen, at a work conference about 8 years ago. She's smart. I'll give her that. She's organized, she's driven, and from the very first Thanksgiving she came to, before they were even married, she had a way of walking into a room like she was calculating what needed to be changed. I didn't say anything about it to Evan. Maureen would have. Maureen had a gift for saying hard things gently. I never learned that skill. They got married 5 years ago. Nice wedding, down in Columbus. I paid for a good chunk of it, which I was glad to do. Maureen would have wanted that. I danced with Gretchen at the reception, and she was warm and funny that night, and I thought, okay, this is okay. My son found someone. Good. The trouble started about 2 years after the wedding. Evan called me on a Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I was watching a history documentary, something about the Dust Bowl, and he said they were having some financial trouble. Gretchen had left her corporate job to start a business, and it hadn't taken off the way they'd hoped. Their rent was going up. They had the baby by then, my granddaughter Abby, just turned 2. He asked if they could move in with me. Just for a while. 6 months, maybe a year, just until they got their footing. I said yes. Of course I said yes. Bart, I said yes. Abby was 2 years old. What was I going to say? I told them, you can have the whole upstairs. I'll take the main bedroom on the first floor. No rent. I don't need rent. Just keep the common areas clean and we treat each other with respect. That's all I asked. They moved in on a Saturday in March. 7 boxes turned into 30. Gretchen's furniture, which was newer and bigger than mine, started appearing in the living room. My old couch, the one Maureen and I bought at an estate sale in 1997, ended up in the garage by the end of the first week. Gretchen said it was taking up too much visual space. I let it go. They're young. They have a toddler. I'm not going to fight over a couch. By month 2, Gretchen had reorganized the kitchen. She moved things I'd had in the same drawers for 20 years. I couldn't find the can opener for 3 days. When I mentioned it, she laughed and said, "Gordon, That whole system was chaos. I don't know how you functioned. Then she showed me where she'd put things, like she was orienting a new employee. I let that go too. Evan started working longer hours. Real or invented, I couldn't tell. He was rarely home before 7. Gretchen, who was supposedly running her business from home, spent most of her days on the phone in the kitchen, which meant I sort of drifted out of the kitchen during those hours. Stayed in my room. Read. Watched TV with the volume low. I started to feel like a guest in my own house. But guests, at least, people are polite to. By month 4, Gretchen had started having her friends over regularly. Not inviting me. Not saying, hey, we're having people over Thursday night, just so you know. Just people would show up, and the living room would be full of voices until 10 or 11, and I'd eat dinner alone in my room. I talked to Evan about it once. We were out in the garage, and I said, Evan, I just need a little more. I don't know. I need to feel like I still live here. He got this look on his face, the look he used to get as a kid when he didn't want to deal with something. He said, Dad, Gretchen is really stressed about the business. Can you maybe just give her some space right now? I gave her space. I kept giving space until I had almost none left. The 6 months turned into a year. The year turned into 18 months. The business, as far as I could tell, never launched in any meaningful way, but Gretchen had started talking about the house in ways that made something in my chest tighten. She'd mention, when we repaint the living room, or I want to redo the back garden in the spring. Not asking. Planning. As if the house was becoming hers through some process of gradual occupation. I want to be fair to myself here and say, I am not a confrontational person. I am a 67-year-old man who spent his career teaching teenagers and who handled difficult parents at back-to-school nights and department heads who stole credit for other people's ideas. I know how to manage things quietly, over time. I am patient. Sometimes I've realized too patient, but I also want you to understand. There was always this voice in the back of my head that said, this is Evan's wife. This is Abby's mother. You push back too hard, you break something that can't be fixed, and your granddaughter is in the middle of it. So I held my tongue. Every time, until Thanksgiving. I cooked. I always cook Thanksgiving. It was Maureen's favorite holiday, and after she died, cooking Thanksgiving became the way I stayed connected to her. I do the whole thing, turkey, stuffing from scratch, sweet potatoes, 3 kinds of pie. It takes me 2 days. I love doing it. The morning of, Gretchen mentioned she'd invited a few friends. Just a few people, she said. Hope that's okay. There were 11 people at my table by 4 o'clock. I had met exactly 2 of them before. Gretchen had set the table. Her doing, apparently, she'd bought new table linens. The old ones that Maureen had hand-washed every year were now in a box somewhere. And she'd arranged the seating. I found out where I was sitting when I came out of the kitchen carrying the turkey, at the end of the table. Not the head. The end. The way you seat the kid who's too young to have a real conversation. I set the turkey down. I looked at the seat. I thought about Maureen, who used to say that the Thanksgiving table was her cathedral, the place she felt most like herself. I sat down. One of Gretchen's friends, a woman in a blazer, very polished, clearly had done well for herself, looked around the table and asked Gretchen who everyone was. Gretchen made introductions, names, and connections, moving around the table. When she got to me, she paused for just 1 beat, 1/2 second. And then she said it. Oh, and that's Gordon. He helps around the house. Polite laughter. The conversation moved on. Evan looked at his plate, and my granddaughter Abby. She was 6 now, old enough to understand tone, old enough to feel the wrongness of something without being able to name it. She looked at me from down the table, with those big brown eyes, and said, Grandpa, are you the help? I smiled at her. I said, No, sweetheart, I live here. And in my head, something settled. Quiet and cold and certain, the way a decision feels when you've actually made it, not just thought about making it. I got through the meal. I was pleasant. I refilled people's glasses. I answered questions when spoken to. The turkey was excellent. Several of Gretchen's friends said so. One of them told me I should do this professionally, which I accepted with a smile. Inside, I was completely still. After dessert, after the guests left, after Evan fell asleep on the couch, I went to my room and I made a phone call. I called my attorney, Marcus. Wait, Marcus is in the file. I called my attorney, whose name I'll leave out, who has handled my affairs since 2003, who drew up Maureen's estate documents, who knew my situation because I had actually called him 3 months earlier when things had started to feel like they were sliding somewhere I didn't like. 3 months earlier, he had walked me through the process. Formal written notice. 30 days. Proper documentation. Everything filed correctly so no one could say later there was any ambiguity. I had the paperwork sitting in my desk drawer. I said, "It's time." He said he'd have everything finalized by Monday. That Sunday, I typed a letter at the kitchen table. I have a typewriter, an actual typewriter, the kind that requires physical effort, that belonged to my own father. I've always thought things written on a typewriter carry a different kind of weight. Maybe that's just me. The letter stated clearly and calmly that I required them to vacate the property within 30 days, per Ohio law, and that any personal property remaining after that date would be considered abandoned. I left it on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, where Gretchen would see it first thing in the morning. I went to bed and slept better than I had in 18 months. The next morning, I was in the back garden. At the table, Maureen and I had bought at a little shop in Vermont on our anniversary one year, drinking my coffee, when I heard the door slam. Then footsteps across the deck. Then Gretchen's voice. "What is this?" She was holding the letter. Her face was doing something complicated. Disbelief, anger, calculation, all at once. I had seen that face on students who'd been caught. I'd seen it on parents who'd gotten a call they weren't expecting. I said, "Good morning, Gretchen." She said, "You can't be serious." I said, "The letter is pretty self-explanatory. Gordon." Her voice dropped, went strategic. "Abby is 6 years old. You're going to put a 6-year-old out of her home." I looked at her. I want to be very honest about this moment because I've thought about it 100 times since. I looked at her and I felt not angry, not satisfied. Just clear. The way the air gets clear after a long rain, I said, "Gretchen, this is her grandfather's home. It has never been her home or your home. I welcomed you here. That's different." She tried several more approaches. She told me I was being cruel. She told me Evan needed me. She told me this would destroy my relationship with Abby, which I knew was the argument she thought would break me, because it was the one thing she knew I was afraid of. I said, "I love Abby more than anything in the world. That won't change, because you move out of my house." Then I added, "Because I had thought about this too, and I wanted it said clearly. And I plan to make sure Abby knows she is always welcome here, whatever happens between the adults." Gretchen stared at me for a long moment. Then she went inside. Evan came out about 20 minutes later. He looked like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. He sat down across from me and we looked at the garden for a while without saying anything. The maple tree at the back had gone yellow. Maureen had loved that tree. Evan said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I looked at him. That surprised me. He said, "I've known this was wrong. I kept telling myself you were fine, that you didn't mind, that I'd figure it out eventually." He rubbed his face. I should have said something to her a long time ago. I said, "Yes, you should have." We sat there a while longer. I told him that the 30 days was firm, that I needed my house back, that this wasn't negotiable. But I also told him that I wasn't cutting him off, that I wasn't punishing Abby, that I wanted to see them regularly, that I would help them find a decent place if needed. I meant all of it. I still mean all of it. He nodded. He didn't fight me. What happened in the next 30 days? I won't describe in detail because honestly it was unpleasant and small. Gretchen was not gracious about it. There were pointed comments and a few slammed doors, and one incident involving the kitchen that I chose to let go rather than escalate. But they moved out on day 28. I watched the last boxes go into the truck from the porch. Gretchen didn't say goodbye to me. Evan hugged me. He held on longer than I expected, and Abby. Abby stood at the end of my front walk, holding her favorite stuffed elephant, and she said, "Grandpa, am I still going to see you?" I crouched down to her level. I said, "Every single week if you want. I'm not going anywhere. This is my house, and you will always be welcome in it." She said, "Okay," very seriously, the way 6-year-olds accept important information, like they're filing it somewhere. Then she climbed into the back seat, and the truck pulled away, and I stood on the porch in the November cold for a long time. That was 8 months ago. Abby and I have breakfast together most Saturday mornings. Evan drops her off at 9, and I make whatever she wants, usually pancakes with too much maple syrup. And we sit at the kitchen table, and she tells me about school, and I tell her about history. Small pieces of it. The things I think a 7-year-old can hold. She loves the story of the first Thanksgiving more now than she ever did before. I don't think she quite knows why. Evan and I are getting there. Slowly. It's one of those relationships that got damaged not by one big thing, but by a long accumulation of small silences. And you can't just have one conversation and be back to where you were. But he calls. He shows up. He's working on it, and so am I. Gretchen and I don't speak. I think about Maureen a lot these days. I think about what she would have said about all of it. She would have handled the whole thing in half the time, with half the pain, because she had that gift of saying hard things gently that I never learned. But I handled it. Eventually. In my own way. In last Thanksgiving. Last month, actually, as I'm writing this. It was just me and Evan and Abby in this house. I cooked the whole thing like I always do. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes. 3 kinds of pie. Abby sat at the head of the table, where she'd asked to sit, and she said grace in the serious way that 7-year-olds say grace, getting half the words slightly wrong, and all the meaning exactly right. I looked around the table at my son and my granddaughter and the hardwood floors I refinished 30 years ago, and the window in the hallway that still sticks. This is my house. That hasn't changed. And if you're out there right now, letting someone make you feel small in your own home, letting someone rearrange your furniture in your life and your sense of yourself while you tell yourself you're being patient, while you're eating dinner alone in your own room, I want you to hear me. You're allowed to say, "This is mine." You don't have to be angry. You don't have to yell. You just have to mean it. I promise you, you're allowed to mean it. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not with bitterness. I'm past that. More like the way you sit on a porch in the evening and watch the light change and just try to understand what the day was actually about. Here's what I keep coming back to. Gretchen didn't do anything complicated. She did something very simple. She moved into a space and kept taking up a little more of it every week, the way a plant will grow toward whatever light is available. She wasn't evil. She was just someone who never learned to stop when there was more still left to take. And I let her, because I kept confusing patience with wisdom. They're not the same thing. Patience is a virtue when you're waiting for something to change on its own. When you're waiting for something that will never change unless you change it, patience is just a slow way of disappearing. I think about Abby asking me if I was the help. That question, out of the mouth of a 6-year-old who didn't even know what she was really asking, was the clearest thing anyone said to me in 2 years. Children have that ability. They haven't learned yet to look away from the obvious thing. She saw what she saw, and she asked about it. Simple as that. And somewhere in that question was the answer I'd been avoiding. What I did after that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I didn't make that call to hurt Gretchen or punish Evan. I made it because I finally understood that there are some things you cannot fix by being nicer, or more accommodating, or more patient. Some things only get fixed when you use your words, not to argue, not to demand, but to simply state what is true. This is my house. This is not your home. Those 2 sentences don't require anger. They just require the willingness to say them out loud. What I've learned, the thing I'd tell any person in that situation, is that self-respect is not a feeling. It's a practice. You practice it the same way you practice anything else worth doing. Imperfectly at first, with doubt, with the fear that you're going to break something you love. And sometimes, you do break something. Evan and I spent months relearning how to talk to each other. That was real, and it hurt, but the alternative was losing myself completely inside my own walls, and that would have broken something too. Something that couldn't have been put back together. Abby still comes on Saturday mornings. She still asks for pancakes with too much syrup. Last week, she told me a story about something that happened at school, some argument with a friend. And when she got to the end of it, she said, "I told her that wasn't okay." Just like that. Matter of fact. 7 years old, and she already knows you're allowed to say that. I don't know where she learned that. Maybe from watching her grandfather figure it out, finally at 67. It's not too late. That's the other thing I know now. It is never too late to walk back into your own life and say, "I live here. This is mine. I'm not leaving."